Hello, everyone. Hello, Isolise. Hello, Hubert. Hello, Guillaume.
Hello.
Hello, all of you. It's such a pleasure to have you all again. We were waiting for this moment with you, Hubert, and so I hope that everyone can see us well, and we have an hour with Hubert to chat about his latest book. So I will start with a quick introduction, and then we will have a sample of questions, and then we'll open up for questions. So please start asking when questions come. So, dear Hubert, it's an absolute honor to have you today. When we first met in Palo Alto a couple of years ago, you were the CEO of Best Buy. You came to Numberly and you gave us a speech. And you gave us a speech on how you were trying back then to turn around Best Buy. And listening to you, I must say, Hubert, back then was a shock. Truly a good shock, but a shock. It was a shock because I didn't know you before, I must say, and I didn't expect you, I must admit, I must confess, as one of the top CEOs in the US, as a member of corporate America. I didn't expect you to have this philosophy of putting people first. And I apologize for that. I definitely had some preconceived ideas that Europeans might have sometimes, as you know, about corporate America. But still, I think you were a strange animal in the business council. I think this gathering of the top US companies that you had attended in San Francisco before we met. And I assume you weren't the typical mainstream guy in that room. So you were special, definitely. And your speech was special. And I remember being so surprised by what you said, by your vision of putting people first, because I thought that was kind of European. And still, the way you included it, you framed it in a very comprehensive vision, was extremely American. So it reminded me of the ideas, obviously, behind the social market economy, the Sozialmarktwirtschaft, the Rhine capitalism, where a socio-economic model combines a free market capitalist economic system alongside social policies that establish both fair competition within the market and also a welfare state. So I remember thinking, so it is actually possible in a large corporation to get the best of the two worlds, to put the people first and to have economic performance. So this is fantastic. This is the future. And your speech was a true inspiration and a highlight of Numberly's growth in the Silicon Valley. So today, with Isolise, it's a huge pleasure to welcome you, Hubert. You are a Numberly friend, and we are so glad to have you present your book, present your groundbreaking ideas and some of your journey, and some of this journey, fantastic journey that you've made. So we gathered a few friends, Hubert, today, many Numberly people who have avidly, I must say, read your book over the past few weeks and prepared this session. Some of our clients, some of our prospects, some of our board members, our shareholders, our partners, a lot of people, in fact, a whole community, because your ideas are enlightening and so timely in today's post-crisis reflection. So welcome, Hubert.
Thank you, Thibault. I so look forward to our conversation. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. So I will have the pleasure today to chat with you, with Isolise and Guillaume Floquet. Hello, Guillaume, our Chief People Officer. So to start, I must say we received a lot of feedbacks, and I know you love feedback, Hubert. So we received some great pieces of feedback from the people we sent our invitations to this webinar, and I thought I had to mention this one. Someone who told me, as someone that worked at Best Buy under Hubert, and I hide his name here, and I'm very interested.
Who is this?
I will tell you. I don't want to quote his name. I will tell you afterwards. He's such an amazing man and an outstanding leader. I don't know if I could name a leader that is more universally beloved by the organization than Hubert. Thanks for thinking of me. So this is the type of leader you've been for the teams you had. And this is, I think, fantastic. So to kick off the session, I wanted to tell first of all that we expect many questions. So please ask them, and we will pick what we think maybe what our people at Numbly think are the most relevant ones, and those will get the book, The Heart of Business. So don't forget to put your name when you ask a question. So this book is The Heart of Business. It's available. Hubert, I think everyone needs to read it. It's an absolute read. So the first section we wanted to open with you, Hubert, was the turnaround of Best Buy, because I think this will give a lot of sense to everything we'll say after. And so I wanted to obviously quote some Jeff person who said, "I've watched Best Buy for a long time, and the last 5 years since Hubert came to Best Buy have been remarkable. I mean, the turnaround that got done there from just a business case study point of view is going to be written about and talked about for a long time." And that was Mr. Bezos just 3 years ago. So congratulations. And I want to say first that Best Buy in 2012, when you arrived, was a company that was very sick, I think. And to be honest, a lot of people thought that it was going to die. It was back then selling boxes, hardware boxes, and everyone thought, I think, that Amazon was going to destroy that business. So some people even said in the press that it was a crazy or suicidal for you to take the job. So Hubert, can you describe maybe a little bit what you did at Best Buy and how you turned around that company?
Thank you, Thibault. You're being overly generous. So back in 2012, so yes, people thought we were going to die. Amazon was going to kill us. Some of the vendors were opening their own stores, so we were very challenged. My view of the situation was that actually the world needed Best Buy, because customers like to, for some of the purchases, need to see, feel, and touch the products and ask questions. And then the vendors, like Apple and Microsoft and Samsung and Sony, needed Best Buy to showcase the fruit of their billions of dollars of R&D investment. And the problems that Best Buy had, in a sense, had nothing to do with Amazon. They were self-inflicted. Prices were too high. The quality of service online and in the stores had really gone down. So the good news with self-inflicted problems is that you can fix them. And so we embarked on a journey to fix Best Buy. There was two main phases. One was really the turnaround. The first 3 or 4 years, it was about saving the company. And then, so that was Renew Blue. And then the second phase was, accelerating growth and trying to create the company we wanted to become. So it was building the New Blue. In both cases, this was a very people-centric approach. So many, analysts and investors told me initially, you're going to have to cut, right? Close stores and then fire a lot of people. We did the opposite. It was a very people-centric approach. To illustrate that, my first week on the job, I actually spent it working in a store in St. Cloud, Minnesota, listening to the frontliners. They had all of the answers. So people were not the problem. They were the source of the solution. It was also about, of course, at the top of the company, we did have to make some changes, but it was also looking first at people to make sure we had the right team. It was also, so there's start with people, there's end with people. So one of the things I had learned from Jean-Marie Descarpentries, one of my clients when I was at McKinsey, was in a turnaround, your first priority is to grow the revenue. And there's, it's amazing what revenue growth can do, right? You guys understand this better than anybody else. And as relates to cost, focus first on non-salary expenses. All of the elements of the cost structure that have nothing to do with people. So as an example, at Best Buy, we sell, large appliances. When we deliver them, we may ding them, damage them. And of course, the customer is not going to like this. So if you can reduce damages and eliminate, generally speaking, waste and inefficiencies in your processes, it's good for the customer, right? Because no customer wants a damaged appliance. And it's good, of course, for the P&L. And treat headcount reduction as a last resort. And And then the last thing I would say, Thibault, for that first phase, it was sometimes as leaders, we think that our role is to create the perfect strategy, the perfect plan, and have then everybody implement that. What I learned is that our job as leaders is mainly maybe to create energy, right? Energy is not a finite resource. And so it was about co-creating the plan, getting going, celebrating early wins. When there was problems, being transparent about them. Oh, that didn't work. Let's get a team together to fix the problem. So a very human-centric approach, not starting with finance, ending with finance.
Yeah, so that's fascinating, this idea of creating energy. I remember you telling us if you want to learn how to ride a bike, you need speed, right? And that's a little bit counterintuitive, because the first reaction is fear, is not to go too fast. And you said exactly the opposite, right?
Yeah, and when we, at the beginning, I had 2 months to create a plan, because we had an activist, our founder wanted to take the company private. So the board said we need to present something to the street. So I had 2 months to create something, and it was far from perfect. In fact, what we shared with the investors produced mainly a yarn, but what was good is that it allowed us to get going. And so the bicycle theory is that it's really hard to direct a bicycle at standstill, right? If you don't move, you fall. And if you move, it doesn't matter if you're not going exactly in the right direction, because you can course correct. So sometimes the lesson here is sometimes we spend too much time trying to come up with the perfect plan, as opposed to getting going and then correcting along the way, because movement creates energy, and then you'll come up with new things along the way. So that was an insight, just the bicycle theory.
Absolutely. Talking about movement, tell us a little bit about what happened with Amazon, because they started with being probably an enemy. At least that's the why that's how it was perceived by the analysts, and you turned them into a partner. How did you do that?
Yeah. So, and sometimes in retail, people obsess about Amazon, right? What are they doing? It's not fair. In fact, in our case, it was not fair because they were not collecting the sales tax, which was a big subsidy they were getting from the government. The first thing we did, Thibault, is essentially neutralize them by making sure we had the same prices as they did, that our online shopping experience was great, that the speed of shipping was as good as theirs. Meaning today we ship as fast, same day, next day. So in soccer terms, we would call this a draw. And then instead of obsessing about them beyond that, we tried to become the best version of Best Buy we could become, right? In competition, if you can be unique, instead of trying to be Amazon, don't try to be somebody else. Everybody else is already taken. Try to be yourself, right? And then, so there was a question. Should we sell in our stores and on BestBuy.com Amazon's products? So Amazon is a competitor, but they are also a vendor of hardware products. And we concluded, different from what Walmart and Target had concluded, that we would sell their products because our mission was to help customers, and these were great products. And so we always sold their products. Then there was a second step. One of our strategies was to partner with the main tech companies and create, in a sense, mini stores within our store. So there was an Apple store, then there was a Samsung store, a Microsoft store, a Sony store. So everybody had the ability to showcase their products, which was good for the customer because they could compare, good for the vendors because the alternative is to build your own stores, which would take a long time, and good for us because, of course, we would collect some money from that.
Yeah, so you made them pay for that. So that was actually the beginning of retail media, in fact.
Exactly. And so physically and we did it at the same time for Google and Amazon, both organizations have a table in our store where they can demonstrate Alexa and then, OK Google, their smart assistants and whatnot, and all of the functionalities. And then there was a further step with Amazon, because one of the things we do at Best Buy is we work with the vendors on future technology and products. And so what Amazon did, which was jaw-dropping for the media, is they gave us the exclusive rights to their Fire TV platform to be embedded by us in smart TVs or any other brands for that matter. And then these would be exclusively sold at Best Buy or by Best Buy on Amazon.com. And so when we made this announcement in 2018, Jeff came to one of our stores in Bellevue, Washington, and we had the media, Wall Street Journal, Star Tribune, and people were blown away that he would do this. But see, other than the pandemic, I think there's a disease in the world, which is the idea of zero-sum games. Mm-hmm. You know, on this webinar, the only way you can win, Thibault, if I lose. That's stupid, right? We're going to win together. And so instead of focusing on zero-sum games, try to create expansive opportunities. And it's Ben Zander's book, The Art of Possibilities. Look for win-win-win. I think as leaders, it's our imperative to look for ways where everybody wins. It's a much better recipe, at least in my mind, when you can do that.
Yes, thank you, Hubert. That's very inspirational, I think, and it's important also, I think, to be aware that we have a number of retailers in the room, probably. So I'd love to finish maybe if on that section, if you could tell us a little bit about how I think one of the most impressive thing to me is how you turn Best Buy from a seller of boxes, of hardwares and stuff into a service company, partly.
So, yeah, I think that's very relevant today, as many companies try to define their purpose or their reason for being, their raison d'etre, which has become quite, fashionable, and was critical in our journey. So after we turned the business around, we spent time trying to define our growth strategy. And as we exit the pandemic crisis, many companies are looking for ways to grow, right? Because sometimes it's been quite, the pandemic has had quite a negative impact on the business. So a key moment, Thibault, was when we said, we're actually not a retailer. So here's the scoop. Best Buy is not a retailer. We are a company that's focused on a purpose, which is to enrich lives through technology by addressing key human needs. Right, which is, I think, more inspiring for everybody working in the company because you're trying to do good things for other people. It's also a way to vastly expand the addressable market, right? So that's how we got into the health space. Many of us have aging parents, so we know that if aging seniors can stay in their home and live in their home independently longer, it's good for everybody. And so by putting sensors under their bed, under their sofa, in the kitchen, the bathroom, fall detection, with AI and remote monitoring and a care center, you can detect if something is going wrong and trigger an intervention. And that service is actually sold through insurance companies, not through our store. Some of the devices are sold in our store, but the channel is actually more insurance companies, and it's leveraging our unique assets. And so you go after these opportunities if you've defined a purpose at the intersection of what the world needs, what you're uniquely good at, what you're passionate about, and how you can make money. Another illustration of this is our in-home advisor program, right? So if your need is too complex to be handled in a store or online, like you're redoing your, let's say in the US, people have big houses, right? So your family room, we'll come to you for free. We'll come to your house and we'll have the conversation there. We'll develop a proposal. You can always say no, but our aspiration is to become the CIO or CTO for your home, which vastly expands our opportunities. So defining a purpose and then, of course, making it come to life through specific initiatives is a game changer to unlock growth and mobilize an entire organization.
Wonderful. So we will come to the purpose section, but first we identified in your book the critical role of the meaning of work with this beautiful quote from Khalil Gibran, work is love made visible. So please comment a little bit on that, Hubert. That's a critical part.
Yeah, because when we think about business activity, there's a question that is not asked often enough. It's the question of why do we work? What's our view of work? And of course, in the Judeo-Christian tradition or the monotheist faith, work as a mixed reputation, right? Because work can be seen as a curse, a punishment, because some dude sinned in paradise. We can also see work as something we do so that we can do something else that's more fun, like go on vacation with friends or something like this. But there's no meaning in work. Or we can see work as a key element of our fulfillment as human beings. Of course, we work a large part of our life. So if we can connect our quest for meaning as human beings with what we do, with our work, then something magical happens. And if we step back, human beings are the only animals that work truly and have put a meaning in their work. And so asking ourselves as leaders, what is my purpose in life and through my work? And how do I connect that with the activities I'm performing? And of course, this is in a context where, according to Gallup, less than 20% of people are engaged at work. And we have also a very current question, which is in the context of back to the office. All the companies that do survey their employees are hearing that employees want to continue to work from home. And that if that's not going to be tolerated, people will just quit and go do something else. People are asking themselves, what is really important in life? And I think that's a great question. And as leaders, it's our imperative to spend time with it. Ask ourselves, a good exercise I ask people is, write your retirement speech. How do you want to be remembered? Right? And in addition, not only ask yourself this question, but ask people around you on your team. See them as not just a colleague, but as a human being who has their own quest for meaning. I think these are critical foundational questions, because then it sheds a light on how we see economic activity in business.
Great. So I will go right away write my retirement speech, Hubert. But maybe before that, we thought, and that was one of your ideas, we could ask the audience, why do you work? So all of you attendees here, you can answer the question, I think, below on your Slido section. And so I will let you a couple of minutes. We continue and we will comment on some of the answers. Guillaume. Your time, my friend.
Yes, well, Hubert, thank you for your first comment first. I loved your book. Actually, I had a few lives in different companies, and today acting with Numberly, where I find the type of people way of thinking that I really enjoy. But what struck me when I read your book is that you articulate two concepts together. There is the first one, which I think is more vertical. It's not the representation made on this slide, but nevertheless, it's benevolence. Because benevolence requires to accept imperfection, and you talk about imperfection in your book, and to show vulnerability to others as a leader, as people could show vulnerability to their boss on a daily basis. The second one is more horizontal. It's about kindness. And you're also talking about kindness, but in a specific way. You talk about it like kindness consists in understanding the value of servicing others. So you were touching on the meaning of work, and maybe one of the meaning of work is to be useful to others. So how did you manage to educate your teams, and at different levels, through these two concepts? Because we definitely not learn that either at school or in many or most of the working environment in which we work. So how did you manage to do that for the people surrounding you and beyond?
Yeah, so I don't know that my teams needed to be educated, because they actually taught me a lot. But it's true that one of the questions we would ask, in particular the frontline leaders, remember, so every year at the company, we would get all of the store GMs together before the holiday season to get ready for the holiday season. And it was also a cultural moment where we ask every one of the frontline managers, what drives you, right? And what's, how does your work connect with what drives you? And what was striking, and I think if we step back, it's quite universal. In the heart of everybody, most people, is a desire to do something good to other people. It's the golden rule. It's the most fundamental. Even Darth Vader, his son believes, still has something good in him. He's trying to save him. In the end, yes, there's something good in him. And so I think it's not difficult there's no need to educate people because it's there. What is our role as a leader is to create an environment where it's actually encouraged to connect that desire to do something good for others with the way the company works. So I'll give you a couple of illustrations of that in our journey. One was probably like you guys, every quarter we would get our executive team together to work on our strategy, our plans, our progress, our organization, and so forth. And as we were exiting the turnaround and moving towards the growth strategy, I asked every one of the executive team members to bring to the offsite a picture of themselves when they were little. And then over dinner, we spent the evening sharing with each other our life story and our greatest desires in life, our quest for meaning, how we wanted to be remembered, what kind of leader we wanted to be. And that did two things. One is allowed us to discover that members of the executive team were actually human beings, not just a CHRO or a CFO or a CMO, but individuals with their complexity of their life, and that 80% of us were driven by the same desire to do something good in the world. And there was a couple of exceptions who didn't last on the team, right? Because they were more self-serving. It was more about them than anything else. And then that gave us a desire and the courage to say, okay, so we're the leadership team of Best Buy. Why don't we use the platform we have, which is Best Buy, to make a positive difference in the world? And what was true for the executive team was also true in the field. I remember visiting a high-performing store in the Boston market where the store GM would ask every one of the associates in the store, what is your dream? At Best Buy, outside of Best Buy, what is your dream? Write it down in the break room. And then he said, my role as the store GM is to help you achieve your dream. So you're really creating this environment where you can get to know people around you at a much deeper level and be in the business of connecting dreams. That's a recipe for me, a key ingredient to unleashing human magic. And your role as a leader, at the end of the day, is not to tell other people what to do, which is the old paradigm, but more to create an environment where they can connect, the fire they have inside themselves with the activities of the company.
But it's not only the leaders; it's also the people in the front line. Maybe you can tell us about the dinosaur story.
Yeah, and it's because all of us are leaders, right, Thibault? At minimum, we're leaders of our life. Yeah, so the dinosaur story, oh my God, it blew my mind and really helped me understand what human magic is about. So back in 2012, Best Buy had been suffering from a mediocre level of service, really deteriorated operational performance. But if you fast forward to 2018, things were changing. And one day I heard about something that happened in one of our stores, which is a young mother and her child, a 3 or 4 year old boy, had come to the store. The young boy had for holiday, he had as a gift, a dinosaur toy. Now, the sad news was that the dinosaur was quite sick. The way you know this is that the head was quite dismantled from the rest of the body, which is not good. But he wanted the dinosaur to be cured. So they went back to the store where they bought the dinosaur. Now, at most stores, most companies, you would have been sent to the toy aisle, and with some luck, you would have been able to buy a new dinosaur. That's not what happened on that day in that store. There's 2 associates, 2 blue shirts, who saw and understood what was going on, that the boy wanted a cure for the dinosaur. So they took the dinosaur, they went behind a counter and started performing a surgical procedure on the dinosaur, of course, substituted a new dinosaur and gave to the child a cured dinosaur. Now, of course, you can imagine the joy of the boy and his mother. Now, here's the question. In the traditional fashion of excellent management, do you think there was a standard operating procedure at Best Buy on how to deal with sick dinosaur? Or maybe even better, a personal memo from me with incentives maybe on how to deal with this kind of a situation? Of course not. And this is a situation where these two blue shirts found it in their heart to take care of the dinosaur and cure the dinosaur. And also felt that they had the freedom to do this. And this was a time, Thibault, where sales were accelerating. And so what we had done is create an environment where people could, feel that their mission was to create happiness, around them with the customers. And I thought that was magical as it was happening.
Absolutely. And I love that story, I must say, Hubert, and I told my kids about it. By the way, I want to thank your kids because I think we owe them a lot because they are partly, I think, the reason why you wrote your book. So we'll talk about the purpose in a minute. But I want first to give some feedback to the audience and to you about that question. We have an unbelievable number of answers, I must say. Some people answer out of, because they need to pay rent, because they need to eat, of course. But some also add because of curiosity, because I want to enjoy human team, engage experience, because I want to challenge myself. I want to feel useful, to have an impact. I want to leave something useful. I want to leave a trace behind me. So we'll send you all those answers to everybody. But this is the first time, I must say, Hubert, in one of our numerous webinars that we have such deep involvement. So thank you everyone for that. I think it gives a great reflection. And also we had that question, Hubert, because you talk a lot about human connection at work, and Guillaume just highlighted the role of this. And after a year of remote and in-person interactions being seen as a risk, how do you recreate human connections?
So I think it starts with a realization about first the importance of human connection at work and what it really means before we go to the remote environments. And we've been trained to believe, per René Descartes of the Cartesian philosophy, that the key in the world is the key thought is I think, therefore I am. And so we've been trained to be smart as leaders. I was struck one day when I was speaking with a young associate in one of our stores. And what the young man told me is that his life had changed the day a manager recognized him and took an interest in him. That gave him a spring in his step. And the lesson for me was, instead of I think, therefore I am, it's I am seen, therefore I am. Ego videor ergo sum, if we want to put it in Latin. And I think part of creating human magic in organizations is to make sure that everybody feels seen and that they can, they exist, they can be themselves, the biggest, version of themselves. That, of course, that leads to the discussion around diversity and inclusion, where everybody feel that they belong and they make a contribution. Related to this is the idea of vulnerability, right? Because we have, again, this myth about great leaders, great contributors as superheroes who save the day. I think it's a much more powerful idea, and we saw this during the pandemic for sure, to have this image of us as leaders and contributors, being vulnerable. And our head of HR, Cami, took the risk one day to share with everybody at the company that for years she had suffered from depression following the deaths of her two parents. There's not many senior level executives in large companies or small companies that are comfortable talking about the fact that they're struggling. And yet, when she did this, it changed the conversation because it established, especially coming from our head of HR, senior executive at the company, that it was okay to be human. And now, of course, in the context of the pandemic, we've seen the humanity of our co-workers. So those of us who are working from home, we've seen their spouses, their children, their dogs, their cats, their Wi-Fi problems, their struggles, their anxiety. Same with our frontline workers, right, who expose themselves to great risk. And so, like in my executive team upside, we've discovered or rediscovered the humanity of our co-workers. And I don't think that's going to go away. And the implication for me of this is that as leaders, we need to learn to lead with all of our body parts, not just our brain, but also our heart, our soul, our guts, our ears, our eyes. And so, of course, today, most companies are working on, back to the office and how do we orchestrate this, which is not an easy task. And in that context, I think there's an idea which is the preferential option for the poor. So putting the emphasis on those who are the most vulnerable, who are struggling the most. So what does that mean concretely? That means people who have difficulties working from home, also new employees. Onboarding is a challenge, right? When you are in a remote environment, it's hard to really connect at a deeper level than if you were in a physical environment. So even though you may decide that some of the work is going to continue to be done remotely, putting a special emphasis on the newbies, the new colleagues, either on the team or on the board, and making sure that you have special attention to that, creating special moments where people can get together and get to know each other, for leaders to reach out proactively, of course, to every one of the team members, but with a special emphasis on those that we feel are struggling the most. So we're being challenged to lead, certainly from a place of humanity as we go through this.
Absolutely. And this really puts to a test the second ingredient, I think, the purpose that you highlight so well in your book. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about this and what's your issue with Milton Friedman's doctrine, this article from 1970, the social responsibility of business is to just increase profits. So what's your problem with Milton Friedman, Hubert?
I think he's guilty as charged. I think he's had a very strong influence on the economic world for about 50 years, as the dominant view was that, yes, shareholder value maximization, profit maximization was the sole responsibility. And I think that we know now, maybe we knew already at the time, that this was dangerous. Of course, we need to make a profit. We all understand this. And shareholders are a very important stakeholder. But what I found, Thibault, is that an excessive focus on profit is wrong. First of all, we have to recognize that even profit, the definition of profit in a P&L, whether you use IFRS or GAAP, that's not even trying to represent economic reality. So don't be fooled by the numbers. There's many ways that GAAP accounting does not represent economic reality. For example, you write down goodwill, you never write it up, or you never put on your balance sheet, any investment you've made in the well-being or training of your employees, right? So it doesn't take into account all of the externalities, right? The damages you're creating in the environment are not there. But also, focusing on profit is not effective, because it's, in my experience, it's better to focus on the drivers of performance rather than the outcome. It's like if my MD was purely focused on managing my temperature, I don't want that MD, right? Because maybe I'll put the thermometer in the fridge to lower my temperature. I'd rather have somebody who is more deeply looking at my health and my well-being, so people and customers. So a narrow-minded focus on profit is dangerous. It's not effective. And so I think the world has awakened to this realization. I think the Business Roundtable, and famously in August of 2019, came up with a new statement of corporate purpose that's much more purpose-driven and embraces all stakeholders. I think most people now agree with that. The challenge is that this is hard to do, right? And because it requires that we rethink, what work is about, what companies are about, and how we lead, which is why this book is really a manual or a guide on how to move in that direction. So created for my fellow travelers who are trying to lead from that perspective.
Yeah, and we have this cartoon about brand purpose because so many companies have had to maybe come up with some brand purpose at some point, and so how do you avoid just being a way to something you have to pay lip service to, pretty much. That's one of the key question, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the declaration of interdependence that you propose in your book.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting. We've seen the rise of shareholder activism in the last few years. I think today there's a rise of stakeholder activism. In fact, employees are demanding more from companies. Employees don't like to be fooled. So if the company's purpose or values are fake, they're not gonna work there. Same with customers. Same with partners. And we've seen around even shareholders demanding more. In fact, over the last several years, Larry Fink of BlackRock, but also same with State Street and Vanguard and AllianceBernstein, they're all telling companies that it's important. Of course, profit is important, but they also need to take into account, their long-term strategy, their impact on society, the impact on the environment. And one of the realizations is that business cannot perform in isolation. Best Buy is headquartered in Minneapolis. Following the murder of George Floyd, right? When the city's on fire, well, you cannot open your stores, right? You cannot run the business. Similarly, if the planet is on fire, you cannot operate the business. It's the biggest business risk, according to Larry Fink. So I think the model going forward for companies is to, in fact, be driven by a noble purpose, put people at the center, and embrace all stakeholders in a way that's congruent and treat profit as an outcome. And it's interesting, so to make it concrete. So I'm on the board of Ralph Lauren. And it's interesting how they have this Design the Change program where, of course, they're a designer. So in the design of the product, they incorporate diversity matters. They incorporate the circular economy and in their business model. So ESG or CSR is no longer an afterthought, something you do once you've done everything else. It needs to be incorporated from the ground up into the strategy and the business model of the company. And because all of the stakeholders are putting pressure from the outside in, I think there's no choice. Companies have to move in that direction. If you don't, it's on peril. To be clear, I don't believe for a second that doing this needs to be at the expense or is an excuse to not perform from a financial standpoint. In fact, on the contrary, I believe that this is the way to create the most value for all stakeholders, including shareholders. And of course, the fact that at Best Buy, our share price has gone from $11 at the low in 2012 to now, I think around 115 is an indication that this actually works.
Absolutely, and this is something, honestly, I can imagine with some of the words you use, noble purpose, the magic, putting people first. I can imagine some skepticism, some cynicism, maybe in Europe or elsewhere, actually. But the great thing in your book is that you make the demonstration, you make it work. You actually have a very pragmatic way of proving things with facts, and I think this will make the difference. So this is wonderful.
For me, my sense at least is that most leaders, most companies now believe that this is the right direction. So it's less about convincing people that this is the right thing to do. It's more about how do you do this? What are the practical implications? And that's why the book is full of tips and approaches on how to move in that direction.
Yeah, that's sure. And Hubert, talking about pragmatic things, I remember once we were discussing together, and I was saying it must have been a challenge arriving at Best Buy. And you told me, no, it was easy. When I arrived, the purpose was easy. It was just to survive. The complexity was after, because we have survived, and what's the next step? So can you tell us, what was the complexity finding the next purpose after surviving?
Yeah, yes, the first phase was do not die. And the team told me afterwards, yes, you were very clear. Because I was telling them, our strategy was not that clear at the time. No, they said, you were very clear. If we don't change, we die. So we decided to change. And it was about fixing things that were broken. So it has a certain simplicity to it. The second phase was not about fixing. There was no gun to our head, but it was about what kind of company do we want to create? What do we want to look like when we grow up? So what's our desire? And that's back to that executive team dinner, right? Based on our own individual life purpose, we wanted to create a company that employees would love, customers would love, that would be a great citizen in the community, and that, of course, shareholders would love as well. And so it was imagining the possibilities and then doing the work, of course, because it's not about just about dreaming, but it was about, yes, it was about love in a sense, and imagining the possibilities. The challenge was figuring out how to make sure that everybody would write themselves into the story. That was the challenge. Because imagine, Isolis, you and I walk into a Best Buy store, and we tell the associates in the store, the local managers, we have great news. Now our purpose is to enrich lives through technology by addressing key human needs. They're going to say, you're saying what? You want us to do what at 10 a.m. when we take our shift? Right? And so that was the challenge. You cannot stay with just corporate level concepts. And so in the book, I tell the story about how we, enabled everyone to write themselves into the story. There was a unique moment. There was a training where we closed all of the stores and we did some exercises where everybody clicked and was able to say, yeah, no, this connects with who I am, and made it very real, which then led to the dinosaur story.
Guillaume, I think you had one question here.
Yes, maybe I'm going to come back to a few of your tips, actually, because we are seeing more and more companies, either in Europe or in the rest of the world, opting for being a mission-driven company or being a B-certified corporation, and all of this could be a little bit of fake or be seen that way. So most of them, and maybe that's my view, are more talking about it than leading through it. And mainly because of the pressure of investors, at least that's what they say. So you've been talking about it, but it seems to prevent them from acting it. So what would be the prerequisites in your view that could create the alignment that you were talking about in this introduction on the purpose?
Yeah, to your point, Guillaume, I don't believe for a second that companies need to become B Corps or entreprise à mission to move in that direction. In fact, it's almost a distraction because it deals with something quite conceptual as opposed to behaviors, which is what then triggers the alignment. I mean, there's no prerequisites to creating alignment among stakeholders. I mean, it's my view is this approach, right? You start with people, making sure you have the right team, and that you give them the right tools. Like, everything I heard in that store in St. Cloud, Minnesota, where I spent my first week, they told me what needed to change. You focus on the customers and doing great things for them. You understand the drivers that lead to a great outcome. So you do the work of knitting people, business, and finance, and weaving in the partners, as we've discussed with Thibault around Amazon. So there's no prerequisite, there's no obstacle, there's no conceptual obstacle. Shareholders are not stupid. They understand that for a retailer to be great, that people need to be happy working there, and that customers need to be happy. And boards also understand this. So sometimes we make it way too complicated, and it's a matter of doing the work around that and creating the right initiatives and the right environment to get this done. But there's no prerequisites other than, my view is, the most critical decision we'll make, and of course, Guillaume, you'll relate to this, right? The most important leadership decision we make is who do we put in positions of power?
Yeah, tell us about change management, Hubert.
Our change management, my initial approach to change management was to change management. Because I'm a bit of a Maoist, right? I believe that fish rot from the head, so we had to change a few people at the top. But then I think it's you change management, you change behaviors by changing behavior. So focusing on people and customer, for me as the CEO, then led to people pay attention to how the CEO is spending their time. And then at some point, the team encouraged us to clearly specify our leadership expectations, right? If the most important decision we make is who do we put in positions of power, being clear about the requirements to be in position of power was an important step, and that was a leverage point.
If I may, there are some questions, and perhaps we can go through we have quite a lot. So if we can, a first one, which is, you say profit is necessary outcome. Can you elaborate? First point, the necessity of being profitable. Second point, profit is merely an outcome based on calculations and norm. So what you think about that?
Yeah, so profit is an imperative. It's you cannot survive if you're not profitable, and if your economic performance is mediocre compared to competition, the activists will go after you. The shareholders, the shareholders are not some abstract notion. They're the people to whom we give our money, right? Money comes from us, and we ask them, in particular in the U.S., to make sure that our money is available when we retire, that we have enough when we retire, right? So that's the reality of shareholders. And so, of course, we have to perform for them. The question of treating it as an outcome is this idea that instead of focusing on the managing the P&L or the balance sheets, it's not bad to do that, but going upstream and looking at the drivers of performance. So even in a turnaround, right? And that's where I've done quite a few turnarounds when I was at McKinsey. The key is to understand the key operational drivers of performance, right? And to make sure that you maximize those. So the big idea is to treat profit as a very important imperative and as an outcome, as opposed to philosophically the ultimate goal, both of our lives and of companies. And
could you give us, Hubert, a few examples of your KPIs then?
Well, it's you build KPIs around the various stakeholders, right? So around people, so you have employee engagement, turnover, diversity. Around customers, it's going to be the NPS and customer lifetime value, and all of the metrics. You guys are the expert at this, around your marketing activities and so forth. Then, of course, you have your carbon footprint. It's interesting how companies, when they make operational decisions now, look at it in a much more multifaceted fashion, right? So I was in a board meeting recently where we're reviewing our supply chain optimization, and the criteria was what is good for the customers, but also what's good on the planet and what's good for shareholders. So of course, profit is the financial indicators are important. One of the interesting discussion these days is should the world develop some norms and standards around measuring the company's performance for the various stakeholders? So we have the Commission in Brussels working hard to create something very complicated. It's been different initiatives around SASB, for example, or others. For me, ultimately, what I believe is that the best indicators are going to be those that are created by companies that are specific to them. Because in general, the way we want to measure ourselves, it's better that we define how we want to measure ourselves than others impose this on us. But at the same time, I recognize the need for comparable norms so that it's easier for investors and rating agencies and the public to compare companies. So there's a lot of work going on there.
Thank you, Hubert. Perhaps another question from Alexandra, who asked, we are facing issues sometimes to keep inspiring our teams, mainly when we are in a hyper operational job focus. Any advice or tips? You start talking about that with your people in your stores, so some tips?
Yeah, and I think any situation can lead to quite a bit of excitement. It's all about how, as leaders, we shape that environment. So in the very, very dark days of Best Buy, when everybody thought we were going to die, we were focused on operational improvements. But it's the way you approach this, right? It's how you work on this through teams, and then you celebrate progress. So there's a key concept, and I learned that from Jean-Marie Descarpentier as well. Sometimes people spend a lot of time focusing on goals and perfection, and his idea was that progress and momentum is the key. And including in our dialogue with the investors, for example, when we unlocked Ship from Store, which was a big unlock for us, initially we did it in 50 stores. We showed that it would work, and then we told the investors we're going to move to 250 stores, and then we told them later that it was 1,000 stores, and that's the progress we were making. So the focus on month-to-month progress and improvement, getting better, is a better focus than an alternative. Sometimes you see companies setting goals, saying they want to be number one, they want to be the best. And then you have rankings. I think this is a disease. I think it's more about becoming the best version of yourself and getting better than becoming the best, is my view.
Thank you very much, Hubert. I do agree and will apply more than perhaps I do today. Another question, Hubert, you mentioned the importance of honesty and growth as important turnaround pillars. Which do you think is more important, success or integrity?
So it is 98% of the questions that are asked as either or are better answered as and. So I'm not going to fall into this trap. But integrity is foundational, right? If we don't have integrity, if we don't have vulnerability, if we don't have transparency, there's no way you can be successful. In the book, I tell the story of when one of my heroes, Alan Mulally, became the CEO of Ford, and Ford was about to lose $17 billion. That's what they were expecting, and they did lose $17 billion. I think it was in 2008 or something, 2006. And so they didn't have a forecasting problem, but at the same time, you know how you do green, amber, and red to assess your performance? Everything was green. And one day, Mark Field, the president of the US market, on his, the Thursday weekly operational performance review, had a red. Because he admitted there was a problem. And Alan said, clap, clap, clap. If we can admit that we have issues, then we can work together to solve the problems. And so integrity and transparency and vulnerability is what leads to excellence.
Thank you very much, Hubert. Another question, which is, could you elaborate on how to decide who to put in position of power? Thank you.
Yeah, so historically, I was putting a lot of emphasis on expertise and experience. And it's not entirely bad, but increasingly I've placed more and more importance on who the person is, what kind of a leader they are, what drives them, and what difference do they want to make. And one of the leadership expectations at Best Buy is to be clear about who you serve. Right? And I told the officers at Best Buy, if you're here to serve yourself or your boss or me as the CEO, it's okay. I don't have a problem with that. Except you can't work here. we're going to promote you to being a Best Buy customer, and we'll take good care of you. Right? I want you to feel that you're here to serve others, right? Serve the frontliners, serve the organization, but it's not about serving yourself. An amazing question I had when I was being interviewed for the CEO job at Kelson Company, so the job before Best Buy, was interviewed by Marilyn Kelson Nelson, the daughter of the founder, and it was to replace her. One of the questions she asked me is, Hubert, tell me about your soul.
I wonder who got that in an interview already. I guess it's not that frequent.
Thank you very much. I think it's amazing word to end this session. It's been already 1 hour spent with you, and it goes too fast. Thank you so much. Each time I'm lucky enough to exchange with you, it's really a huge pleasure. So thank you all to been with us for this hour, and please spread the words and discuss about it, because it's not easy discussions, but it's discussions we need to have now, and which are important. So bring your ideas and bring your soul also in this discussion in Europe, in the US, whatever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hubert.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.